Hey everyone, welcome back to Breakthrough Innovation, where we uncover what it really takes to lead change, create value, and build what's next. I'm JL Heather, one of the co founders of Centered, where we help firms and organizations navigate complexity, spark creativity, and unlock the full potential of their teams through innovation coaching and strategy. Today's guest brings depth, range, and psychological precision to the hardest leadership transitions. We're very lucky to be joined by Dr. Kelly Kinnebrew, a psychologist, executive coach, AI entrepreneur, and organizational strategist who helps senior leaders find their footing fast, especially during those high stakes first 90 days of a new role. She's coached over 1,100 leaders across industries like tech, healthcare, cybersecurity, finance, and construction. And she's worked with organizations including Oracle, PwC, Dartmouth, Health, I'm sure, among many others. Kelly is also the co founder of Minerva, an AI powered workplace coaching platform, and is currently co authoring a powerful book on professionals who've navigated mental health collapse and come out the other side. Whether she's helping Gen Z thrive at work, advising CEOs during AI integrations, or building the future of coaching tech, Kelly brings insight, candor, and tools that work. Kelly, I love my little social psychology, organizational psychology books. I am by no means an expert, but it's a fascination for me. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's so good to be here.
So before we dive into maybe some of the more general questions, you mentioned earlier you were involved in some of the legislation in Colorado around AI. I'm curious, what's your perspective on that? What are you seeing? Where do you think it's going?
Yeah, so Colorado is one of two states that's crafting what's called foundational AI legislation, and that's a big deal for the country. It's Colorado and Connecticut, and they've worked pretty closely on crafting this bill that passed through our legislature and Connecticut's about a year and a half ago. It passed with reservations, and it's a good thing it did have reservations because the tech community here has all sorts of reservations about this relatively poorly drafted bill. They had a task force put in place that did improve it semi-substantially, but it's still not a great bill. So where it stands now is it's trying to protect consumers, a good thing. Who would be against protecting consumers? But it's crafting legislation that already exists in our books at a federal level. So we worry that it'll do a couple things, make it harder to understand when legislative action should take place when it's at odds or confusing with federal legislation that's existed for decades. Secondly, it is really vague in its language, and that makes it challenging for a startup to figure it out. And the third biggest thing is, listen, the Googles of the world that helped craft some of this legislation behind the scenes are going to be fine in this. They have a raft of attorneys and ability to deal with whatever comes at them. But when the requirements are the attorney general of a state needs to review any complaint related to anything that where AI ever touches, that's sort of like saying, well, anything that the internet's involved in, anybody can make a complaint about it, and you have to prove your lack of bias in whatever tool that you're using. AI is quickly becoming ubiquitous. So this is a waste of time, we think, a waste of money. But here it's passed, so we're working with the legislation to figure out how startup and tech can be protected from this and really not have small tech stamped out before they get started with innovations that are intended to reduce bias that all humans have. So now we're getting into the psychology part of it.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to me, like AI seems to be lowering the barrier to entry in so many places in a number of ways, sometimes effectively, other times not so much. It almost feels like this is a way to protect established businesses from the startups almost. And then that doesn't feel quite right. Am I
Yeah.
interpreting that right?
That's interpreted correctly. It is, and on the face of it, again, I think that the consumer might think, "Well, this is just tech trying to get one over on us." And I'll tell you what, I'm tightly tied into the Colorado AI community, and pretty much to a person, these startups are intended to do something good. It's intended to solve a problem that does the opposite of hurting consumers. But now listen, there are always gonna be exceptions to that, and that's why the legal process exists, but let's allow small tech to get off the ground, and this bill has improved since its drafting, thanks to a lot of us who complained and said, "Listen, you need some triggers," whether that is hopefully a revenue target that is passed, and they elected to go with number of employees. Doesn't really help that much, but it's better than nothing. So,
Right.
yeah, that's what you're right on that read.
Well, and it's interesting to me, like, when you talk about the removing bias as well, because bias is such a like, we tend to talk about bias as a, universal thing, but I think it's also a very human, individual thing as well that affects everyone in a different way, so I also worry about that. I am curious, given that you're co-founding Minerva, so the AI-powered coaching platform, how is this affecting you as one of those small businesses?
It's not affecting us yet because we haven't it'll be a while till we hit their 50 employee trigger. Uh, and we're also not yet in what's called high consequence decisions, which any foundational or this foundational AI bill articulates as a requirement for this to apply to any
Gotcha.
startup. Lots of my innovation friends and people whose platforms I'm impressed by are affected by this right away. And they've already had to pull back on their investment they make in feature build out, and tech grants are not coming to Colorado as much anymore because they don't want to deal with the future landscape of this. For our platform, Minerva, it helps people be more effective in influential conversations. So it gives real-time coaching to a user on Zoom to do that. So it's not high consequence decisions, but eventually it will be. It'll be impacting decisions at some level, and you can imagine then the attorney general would get some complaints in front of on their desk saying, "Well, I think this Minerva thing played a 5%, 10% role in why I didn't get hired into that job."
Right. Or
Okay.
layoffs or any
Yeah,
number of
it's a
things.
lot of reach there that would be hard to prove and costs a lot of money to squelch a complaint.
Hmm. That seems it's such a complex landscape, and I realize, like, AI is scary, especially depending on whether or not you feel like it's coming for your job, things like that. I do wanna shift a little bit because with what you're doing with Minerva, this AI-powered coaching platform, as a coach myself, I can't help but look at some of these things and wonder, like, what is the future of coaching? Like, how does this look? What does it do to how does it affect me and my clients, things like that? And there's another part of me that thinks like this can't be anything but good. Anything we put out there in the world that can make help and support more easily accessible is good. So I'm curious from your perspective, like how is AI reshaping leadership development? And then where do you see most companies missing the potential of leadership development? Is it AI? Is it something else?
So I do a lot of training, a lot of platform training with executives going through, let's say, a leadership development program for several months, and they're an intact cohort, or I'm building a design for a company or a late stage startup that's maybe the first of their kind to assess the C suite and then coach them through the first year, let's say, of their onboarding. And so when I look at how AI would ideally be used in these circumstances and some of how it is being used now, it's certainly at the design stage. This is the culture of our company. This is where it's probably going to be in a few years. So you're using a large language model with a really good prompt that you're continually touching and massaging to help analyze that input, the input of the leadership team's characteristics, even the P&L and the financials, and you're so it's that analysis step that can be a helpful addition to a skilled team of consultants and in-house people. And then after that, it's using AI to check your conclusions. So I might put Hogan assessment data, Aerobia data, a bunch of other data, 360 interview data into a very well prompted LLM that I've been working with that also knows my approach and what my approach isn't, and will review that data and say, these are some hypotheses I'm coming up with about this leader, this team, this cohort. This is what you might do next if you're going to use polarity management tools. This is 5 ideas of how you could structure that set of exercises or 4 months. It's that. And then there's never a case, even though I use this a lot, tools like this, where I take what they say and say, "That's good, we're gonna run with that." I mean, it's a lot of back and forth of saying, "That works, that doesn't. I don't even need to tell you why it doesn't work, it just doesn't." So,
Right.
it's a back and forth.
Well, and I appreciate that you switched the language a little bit from AI to LLM as you were talking about it, because I think that's a big distinction people are missing sometimes, because it is a large language model, and while it simulates intelligence well, it's not the same intelligence as a highly qualified coach like yourself. I think what I hear you saying, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is they're going to be really good at helping identify the themes, the trends, the call outs based on the input you give it, but it's really dependent, one, on the input you give it, and two, your evaluation after the fact.
Absolutely. It's all of that. You don't forget your brain in this
Right.
process.
Yes. So it's still human in the middle to some extent, but it is a tool that probably accelerates your work and allows you to do a little bit more with the data you have coming in.
That's it.
No, I love that. And I won't lie, I have used LLMs myself to help collate feedback, pull out insights, and to validate some of the things that I was thinking. So I'm glad, one, that I'm not the only nut that I thought I was. And two, that there are tools being developed to help do that in hopefully a more responsible and consistent way. Cause I think it is a little bit of the Wild West right now.
Yeah. If I was to add a caveat, at least in our startup space, there is being sold a lot of, or some tools rather, that claim to be able to take inputs like a set of email exchanges or Slack messages and look at what your face is doing in a meeting and come to some conclusions about your personality at your core and what you're feeling in that minute. And the data doesn't support this. Listen, we'd pull it into Minerva if it did, and maybe in future we will, but I'm a psychologist and I know what good research is and what bad research is. And the statistical significance of what's being sold in the what's called affective or cognitive tech is spotty and sketchy. And so be careful what you're buying and what you assume it's assessing because it looks good on a website.
Yeah. Does LLMs do a really good job of pretending, for lack of a better word? So it's hard sometimes for a layperson to truly understand where some divergence from statistical significance or relevance starts to take place. I think to maybe move a little bit more general and maybe a little bit away from AI, knowing that you've coached 1,100 plus senior leaders, I'm curious about the patterns you're seeing that differentiate between the people who can sustain their effort over time and those who burn out. I think when we talk to a lot of entrepreneurs on our side, burnout is a very real problem, especially for people who are in it for the first time and things like that. So what should they be looking for in themselves that are signs, and what are some of the things that they should be doing to help protect their own mental health?
Yeah, and it's timely since we're I'm working with a co-author on a book about this since it seems to be a need. The first thing is recognizing the national culture that we're in. The US is one of high productivity, it's due and be ambitious and prove it to everybody. So if you're in that culture, you're always going to be fighting that kind of headwind. And maybe fighting is the wrong word, but it impacts, and still men more than women, how your sense of self rests so heavily on this set of cultural mandates. So if you're trying to avoid burnout, well, the first thing is to just constantly do an inner check on who you are right now. I'm reading a book right now about what is referred to as other selves, meaning there's yourself now, and then there's a bunch of future selves. And you don't know what the future selves of you are, even though you're pretty convinced you do know that, but you don't. And so the decisions that you're going to make later are based on information about who you are that you have yet to ascertain and uncover. So I have a couple leaders I work with who say, people are worried about my sustaining this pace, Kelly. What should I do? And I said, well, are you worried about sustaining the pace? CFO you, CEO you? And they'll say, well, right now I think I've got it pretty much in balance. And I'd say, well, I think I'd go with your gut there. You probably know that this is the time to make hay. Go make hay. If it's impacting your family in ways that you don't like later, you need to do something about that. But if you've come to some kind of agreement between the parts of your life, family, children, colleagues, boss, yourself, other people, your health, those kinds of components that are in a reasonable current balance state for you, go with that. A balanced life is one I think that looks less in the coming few months or few years even. It's looking at chunks of years and whether on a long-term horizon, this is all balancing. So that's the biggest piece of advice I'd give. I'd say know what's working for you and what energy is stimulating and sustaining and what you're giving up that is fine to give up right now that later you're going to pick up. And then make sure you do pick it up later.
It's interesting. You used the word balance, and I feel like there's a little bit of a movement away from the concept of work life balance. And the term I hear thrown around a lot is work life integration. I'm curious from your perspective, is that the right way to go? Is there some validity there, or is it really truly about balance?
One company I work with who's a late stage startup in cybersecurity, they refer to this as work life blend. And I really like that phrase. I think it captures it pretty well. Better than balance, better than integration. Integration might be a new version of just keep doing your work at
Absolutely.
10 p.m., and just then you can start at 10 a.m. I don't know. Sure, if that's working for you, great. And if that works for your company, terrific. It's just that that sense of blending is an equation that you're putting together and a deal you're making between your own needs and the organization you work for or the clients you have their needs and the other parts. So I think the key here I think is just more looking at the long term and not the short term to figuring out whatever that blend turns out to be right now.
I think that's probably a good advice for business in general as well as individual leaders, balancing, well, not even balancing, a focus on the long term. Now, Kelly, we are getting close to the wrap up time, so I want to ask kind of the last, a little bit more open ended question because I'm curious. I think burnout is such a big topic; it's right there in everyone's faces. I'm curious, from your perspective, given your experience, what are some of the things leaders are wrestling with behind the scenes that maybe doesn't get the right amount of attention, but absolutely shapes their success or failures?
I think what doesn't get the right attention is how people are working around various degrees of personality disorders all the time at work.
Mm,
Because I focus and study things like narcissism, and there are estimates of about 25% of the people you're working with would be diagnosed with some version of narcissistic disorder or at least flaming traits on a continuum. Well, that's gone up over the decades, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But I think what's not being paid attention is pay attention to what you're seeing and hearing from the people that you respond positively to and the people that you don't. And the people that you don't, regardless of the leadership hat they have on, maybe this is somebody you're reporting to or somebody who's up the chain from you, understand that the people who are promoted continually often are mentally ill and that they've gotten there for also because of all sorts of strategically skillful interpersonal abilities that they've been able to hone, and that you're not crazy if your reaction is this person isn't doing well for me. There are a lot of people I speak to who have just ingested this damage to their self identity because they've been in the grips of a boss or a culture that has damaged them, and they sort of feel like they're not allowed to talk about it because it's sort of just work. So pay a little bit more of attention to that. And then also of course, what comes with that is appreciating the impact that somebody and the people you work around when you're doing really well with that has. And the thing they'll finally say about that is related. Context matters a great deal. When I formally assess leaders and they get data back from a lot of interviews with people they work around and assessment and self-assessment and pulse survey, they will say, wow, I'm super pleased with this piece of data, or I'm not so pleased with this one. I'll say, don't get too excited or too upset because you change context and change organizations, all that will look really different.
no, I love that, and I think, you know, for a while, I feel like those dark triads, the dark triad of traits got a lot of attention, but I feel like it's fading. So I enjoy that you're raising that concept of mental illness, mental divergence, whatever the right term is, that oftentimes you see in leadership. I do, it's a version of the Peter principle, right? You get promoted to your highest level of incompetence, and that looks very different for different people. That could be from a business perspective, a leadership perspective, you name it. So I think that's a great one to call out. So Kelly, if people are looking for some support for their organization, they could use your help. What's the best way for them to reach out and connect?
You can find me on LinkedIn. It's Kelly Kinnebrew in Boulder, Colorado. I think I'm the only Kelly Kinnebrew in Boulder, Colorado. So LinkedIn's the best place to go.
Awesome. Kelly, I appreciate it. I was watching the time. Yeah, I had so many more questions. This has been a lot of fun to discuss, and I think it's been really valuable. So thank you for your time. For everyone else who's made it all the way to the end of us with us, first, don't forget to leave that 5-star review. It helps us a whole bunch. But in the comments, I'd love to hear about your struggles with leadership or where you see leadership in your organization failing you in whatever form that takes. I think there's a lot of different ways we look at that, and I'd love to hear your perspective. And then lastly, if you know someone who could benefit from hearing from Kelly, share this episode with them, share the wealth. We'd really appreciate it. Kelly, thank you again. For everyone else, we'll see you next time on Breakthrough Innovation.
Thanks, JL. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, I agree.